the research director here at the Elling Eide Center. I want to welcome you all this evening. It's not often that we have a chance to have talks here on the evening. On behalf of the staff, I want to welcome everyone to the 5th, I think, lecture in our Florida Scholars Speaker Series. We developed this lecture series to highlight the academic research from our state in areas that were of scholarly and personal interest to Mr. Elling Eide. Those areas include languages, literature, and culture of East Asia, as well as the diverse cultures of Central Asia and the Indian subcontinent. His passion for the vast history of this region is reflected in the extensive holdings of the center's library. The 72 acres on which this library stands reflects Elling's deep interest in horticulture, ecology, and the natural environment of Little Sarasota Bay and South Florida more generally. While Elling's fascination with the cultures of indigenous people of the American Southeast can be seen in his endowment of a position in the University of Florida's Department of Anthropology dedicated to the study of the languages of Florida's native people. Today, we are very pleased to welcome Dr. Noel Boucquey, Associate Professor of Environmental Studies at Eckerd College, and Dr. Jessie, Assistant Professor of Anthropology at Eckerd College. They drove down through that terrible storm in traffic to be with us tonight, so we're very happy they made it. So one half of your journey is done. Dr. Boucquey's research focuses on how relationships between human and environmental factors form in particular spaces and with what effects on the social and ecological well-being of these systems. Dr. Fly's research focuses on sustainable livelihoods and household food security, and she has conducted research on this topic for nearly a decade in a small coastal village in the Mekong Delta in Vietnam. Together, they are studying fishing practices around the Tampa Bay area and the communities of fishers who use these spaces. And I was introduced to this research just very briefly through Andrew Chittick, who's a professor of history at Eckerd College. And I was quite fascinated by the way in which this sort of research that I often in my own field, which is in Chinese studies, see carried out abroad is being done here at home. And I thought that was very, very interesting and worth taking a closer look at. So they are here together today to present some of this research in a lecture entitled Tampa Bay Shore Fishing Spaces, Commons, Conviviality, and Well-Being, a talk that we clumsily retitled for our marketing as Building Communities Through Fishing in Tampa Bay. So, without further ado, please welcome Drs. Boucquey and Fly.
We're just using the keyboard for.
Click or press the space bar. I think we'll get it.
Okay, well, thanks so much for having us, and thank you for that kind introduction. That was wonderful. We're thrilled to talk to you today about our research, which we've been doing for over 5 years now, all around the Tampa Bay area, looking into these shore fishing spaces and what types of communities are built there, including community that crosses species boundaries. So we're excited to talk with you today.
I think we can say, since we have such a nice intimate group here, if you all are okay with it, please just as we go ask questions and chat with us so we can keep this relatively informal.
Well, my history in terms of a researcher, I have been studying fishing issues since I was in graduate school, so for over 10 years now, and I have looked into fisheries conflicts between commercial and recreational folks up in North Carolina, and I've looked at marine spatial mapping processes and some of the decision-making that goes into those. So lots of time spent interviewing both commercial and recreational, and now subsistence fishing as well. So I'm a human geographer by training, so I'm really interested in the relationships between people and the places they're in, and the non-human species that they interact with and how they form kind of different relationships.
And again, I'm Jessie Fly. I actually have a bachelor's degree in biology, and while I was a biology major, I got really interested in botany, and then got really interested in people's relationships with plants. So that's how I ended up finding my way to anthropology for my PhD. I'd never taken an anthropology class in my entire life, but I wanted to get into ethnobotany, the study of the relationship between plants and people. So I found an ethnobotanist I wanted to work with, went to the University of Georgia, and started on this journey to getting a PhD in anthropology. So I am an environmental anthropologist by training. So I study the relationship between people and their environments, their natural environments. And I started at Eckerd back in 2013, and have been teaching classes on these subjects since then. So Noelle and I like to call the origins of our project our kind of research meet cute, because it's kind of interesting. Again, I got to St. Petersburg and Eckerd in 2013. Noelle got there in 2015. We're in totally different departments, totally different collegia, different sides of campus. But both of us were starting to notice the same things around Tampa Bay. We were both getting really interested in the people fishing along the piers and along the sides of the road. And we were wondering, who are these people? What are they doing out there? What are their livelihoods like? Why are they fishing? What's their relationship with the environment? All these sorts of things. So I think it was in 2016.
Yeah.
We both started getting a couple of our courses involved and starting to interview fishers because we were interested in what was going on there. And in 2016, I was the chair of our institutional review board, which is the board that has to basically approve all human subjects research to make sure that it's being ethically done. So I was the chair of that board, and Noelle's review proposal came in about her class and the research that they were doing with fishers. And I said, I'm doing the exact same research as you are. We should join forces and start a research project together. And so that's where this all began, and we've been working on it since then.
Okay, so one component of the problem that we noticed, or one aspect of what we were noticing, were all of these kind of no fishing signs around the Tampa Bay communities, right? In spaces that we knew from newspaper articles had previously been open to fishing. And so this is, we started to do additional research. We looked further back in time, started reading more and more newspaper articles, talking about some of the contentious moments when these spaces became closed to fishing, and some of the arguments back and forth between people who were in favor of open access to fishing and other folks who were very much against it. So this became something that we were curious about, and we wanted to ask more questions about what was going on with these spaces that were beginning to be closed to fishing and historically had been open.
And so here's our research sites. We're all around Tampa Bay here and out on the coast over here, but mostly in this area right here. And these are some of the areas that we started to get interested in terms of these enclosures of fishing spaces. The legal enclosures was the first thing we were interested in. So we found that 75% of the sites that had recently been closed because of city ordinances were around this region, and that also happens to be the third wealthiest tract in the county. The top two wealthiest tracts are up north, and they don't even touch the water. So this is the wealthiest tract that touches the water, and this is where the majority of these city ordinances have been put into place to close off to fishing.
So here is kind of a real estate ad for the Snell Isle neighborhood, which was historically constructed around the 1920s and 30s. And I'm going to hold this paper because I'm going to read a few quotes in a minute here. Yeah, so this is the scenic, Eden Snell Isle Bridge. And it's a great place for catching snow if you happen to be enjoying catching snow. But in 2016, the St. Petersburg City Council voted to ban fishing from this bridge. So not that long ago. And while there are some bridges where it's still legal to fish, the closing of this bridge and others like it kind of in and around the Tampa Bay area, in one of these most affluent communities, really stirred a lot of controversy. So according to the newspaper article, the mayor's office said they were trying to be responsive to the concerns of the neighborhood. So city council claimed the ban was because of safety issues, that fishing from the bridge posed a threat to fishers. It's a narrow bridge, and city council claimed that fishers were stepping out into the road in front of cars. A resident of the neighborhood quoted in the paper kind of ventured more into claims of belonging and who belongs and who doesn't belong. And they said it's stressful to the neighborhood when you have strangers coming in to fish and you have young children playing in the neighborhood, he said. And then the paper then quoted a counterpoint from another St. Pete resident who said, I'm taking a wild guess here, but I'm guessing the men and women who come to fish are blue collar. These are not people going there because they have many other options. And then someone we actually interviewed said they think they rule the roost and a fisherman's nobody. I don't begrudge them, but it's getting harder and harder to find a spot in St. Pete where you can fish from shore. So it's, we could clearly see that there were some class tensions here. There were some kind of insider-outsider tensions, and that, people cared about these spaces one way or another. So yeah, absolutely.
So the Courtney Campbell Causeway is another place that was a source of controversy for these same reasons that the Snell Isle Bridge was. The Courtney Campbell Causeway, if you're familiar with or unfamiliar with it, it spans the northern part of Tampa Bay, and it was the site of a really bitter controversy in 2013 when the Florida Department of Transportation banned fishing around the pedestrian walkway that runs alongside of, kind of runs parallel to the bridge. So again, official spokespeople for the Department of Transportation cited safety issues to explain this ban, concern for the safety of the fishers and other recreational users of the bridge. But the public dialogue about the ban quickly became about the risk posed by the fishers to other people. And so there's really interesting discourse in the newspaper about this. So we have two opposing positions that were published in the letters section of the Times, and they illustrate this really well. So we've got these quotes to read to you. So one letter reads, so pedestrians who carry a fishing pole are banned from this span, but vehicles which could run into and seriously harm pedestrians are all allowed. If officers are to prohibit fishermen from using the bridge, they should also prevent bicycles from using the bridge. After all, by law, bicycles are considered vehicles and subject to the rules of the road, and vehicles are specifically banned from using a pedestrian bridge. I suggest a compromise. Bicyclists should stop objecting to fishermen so they can share this expensive bridge. That was one. And then the other letter says, well, tough. After 37 years of living and bicycling all over the Tampa Bay area, I can state categorically, people who fish off bridges are slobs. Don't believe me? Go check out any bridge popular with anglers. You'll find discarded beer cans, broken beer bottles, old coolers and parts thereof, fish guts and bones, hooks and lures, fishing line waving in the wind, old chairs and other plastic garbage, etc. If the local fishermen and women would leave only memories, they would be a lot more welcome. So very interesting about who belongs here and who gets to make decisions about how the spaces are used.
Yeah, so these kind of observations that we were making are concerned with, okay, why does this matter that fishing spaces might be becoming closed? Kind of led to some key questions that our research has sort of followed in various ways. But we wanted to know more about who's actually using these spaces. What are their demographics? How are they using these spaces? Is it just for fishing? Is it also socializing? What's all going on there? And what are some of the benefits of, we call this the Urban Fishing Project. So what are the benefits of fishing in urban areas? Are there is there anything unique about the fact that most of these areas are adjacent to urban zones? What are some of those benefits? And also any potential drawbacks as well.
So as you said, we've been working on this project since 2016. We even had a few groups of students doing some interviewing before that, but we've been working together since 2016. We've been doing all sorts of things. We've done lots and lots of interviews with fishers and other folks out in these shore fishing spaces. We spent a couple of summers doing a big survey of the folks out in these fishing spaces. We have had students working on a newspaper data analysis from starting in 1900, right? And coding all the newspaper articles that have anything to do with fishing, and sort of how it's represented in the newspaper, what's being talked about, those sorts of things. And then during COVID, we had some interesting time. We had our project went on hiatus for just a little while, but we still needed to be including students in the research and collecting data. So they all got a fishing pole and they went out on the piers and the bridges, and we taught them how to do really good ethnographic observation and write really great field notes, and the students did a wonderful job with it, and they also loved being out there and fishing. And Never shortage of volunteers, that's right. So those are the things that we've been doing to collect data over the years.
Yeah. And these are all of the spaces that we collect data from. So the different colors are just noting kind of the different regions. So we had, for our surveys, we had a sampling procedure where we would, go to each of these groups, area groups, and try to, sample the different fishing spaces there. We started with a map that the IWC produces, which shows all of the fishing piers around the bay. And then we supplemented that with interviews with fishers, asking them, where else do you typically fish? So we identified these 67 spaces, and that's where we've been doing the bulk of our work.
And we know there are plenty more, but plenty of fishers said, I am not going to tell you my best fishing spot. So we know we were missing some of those spaces.
We acknowledge.
All right, so what have we found all these years? The first thing is that urban fishers spend a lot of time in these spaces fishing, which might seem like a silly little conclusion, but I think as you'll see a little bit later, thinking about the people that they're spending time with and what they're doing out there, it really is quite significant that all these folks are spending so much time in these spaces together. So on average, the fishers are spending 5.5 hours at a time when they're out there fishing. They go out and fish quite a lot. So you can see 18% of the fishers go out more than 15 times in the past month. These 42% are probably a lot of tourists actually that are just in for the week or even the weekend. But we have quite a lot of people that live in the area who go many, many times a month.
And I know this is fishing from boats, not just
No, it is just from shore. That's a great question. Yeah, thank you. This is just from shore fishing.
Yeah, and just to kind of touch on that, we decided deliberately to focus on shore fishing primarily because at the beginning of our project we were really interested in people who might be fishing for food, and we figured that most likely they were going to be from shore, not maybe being at the show for but I just wanted to mention, this is, we think this is especially significant because there are so few public spaces where people are spending this amount of time, right? So in that way, they're really special spaces where, people are actually out in public and, communicating with others and with, the outdoor world and the infrastructure. And it's just very unusual to find this in a public space.
Did you do anything about deciding whether most of these fishermen are catch and release or if they're actually consuming fish at home?
That's coming right up.
Yeah, answering the question, absolutely. Huh?
Yeah. So, I mentioned we were especially interested in people who might be fishing for food and in this connection with food security and what role these spaces played in, potentially adding to people's food security. And one way of conceptualizing food security is to think about, just the basic security itself, like nutritional needs. Are your nutritional needs being met? And then there's a couple other elements of food security which are interesting. One is just safety, right? Are people are getting calories? Maybe they're getting enough calories, but maybe it's not the healthiest. So that's one component. And another component people talk about is called food sovereignty. This is, whether people actually have choices in what they're eating, right? So, someone might be getting enough calories, but if they're getting those calories from, a food program and maybe have to eat what they're given and maybe that doesn't match what they're historical, cultural, then we would say they don't have as much food sovereignty. So these are kinds of concepts that we're thinking about as we're doing this research.
Yeah, just to add on to that, the food security world, we've been talking about not just the food that people are actually literally putting in their mouths, but the way that they procure their food should be culturally appropriate and safe and all those sorts of things. So we're factoring that even into this concept of food security.
I was going to mention to you, we have a question in our survey that was taken right from the USDA Food Security Survey. So, we had a question about how often does your household go hungry in a 12-month period? And we did find that about 20%, nearly 20% of the people that we surveyed met the federal definition of food insecurity.
And the example I always give for my students of food, or give to my students of food sovereignty is, say the United States was going through a famine and you were really hungry, and the government of Uganda came and dropped a bag of millet on your front porch. You might be able to get calories from that millet, but it would not be the culturally appropriate food. You wouldn't necessarily know what to do with it. You wouldn't think it tasted good. You didn't grow up eating that. You would be very uncomfortable. So even if you had enough calories, we wouldn't consider you food secure at that point, or truly food secure, because of these other elements of food security. So that's kind of the example I sometimes give my students. All right, so we can kind of break down this idea of food security and talk about what we found. So the first question we're asking here is, does access to shore fishing spaces support nutritional food security? So are people getting necessary calories from the fishing trips that they take? And we got kind of a mixed bag answers on this. We'll show you that in just a minute. But there are still a significant number of people that seem to be relying on fishing for an important part of their diet. So 10% of our surveyed fishers said that they were fishing mostly for food, but I will offer the caveat there that people who also place themselves in fairly high income brackets gave that answer as well. So saying that I was fishing mostly for food was spread out among poor fishers and relatively wealthy fishers. So it's not necessarily when you say you're fishing mostly for food that you actually need to be fishing for it. 12% of our surveyed fishers said that fishing was very important to feeding themselves and their families. Again, we did have a bit of a split there in terms of how these people reported their household income as well. So people are saying, feeding myself through fishing is very important, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I would have no other way of feeding myself. So that's kind of an interesting distinction that we found there.
Yeah, and these are just some quotes that we have from our interviews kind of on this topic, right? So one person, I think this was from the South Skyway Bridge Pier, told us, some people fish for sport and I fish for the port. And I just thought that was an interesting way of phrasing it, right? He was explaining that he was going to, consume all of the fish that he caught that day, and that was important to him. Another person said the water is my grocery store. So really linking that, to food provisioning. And 10% of our survey respondents, we had a question that asked you, does fishing in particular help, keep your household from going hungry? So about 10% said yes, it does.
But interestingly, some of those people would have said that they were out there fishing for recreation. So we got some, the data was a little hard to kind of piece out that way. And we got some answers that we didn't necessarily expect. Sort of on the other side of this, here's some other quotes from folks. A couple of people we talked to who did say that they were eligible for food stamps said, if I'm hungry, I'm going to go to the grocery store. This is not the best way to catch calories. Could have to do with their fishing prowess. We don't know, but they would kind of chuckle at us and say, like, no, I don't depend on this. I'm doing this for fun. I'm doing this to be outside. I'm doing this to be with my friends and family. I don't necessarily need to do this for food. And another man said, well, that's why they call it fishing, not catching, because it's difficult sometimes to actually be able to feed yourself this way.
Yeah, and this is just kind of, getting this range of responses and, finding people who definitely meet the standard of food insecurity but also having, people in wealthier income brackets talk about how feeding, themselves with fish from that they caught themselves was important. We started to take a broader view of, this cultural food security concept, and also just to think about these spaces and these people in, just a broader way.
And also to couch this data, and we'll touch on this now and then touch on it a little later, we also discovered that there really is a stigma among fishers about talking about fishing for subsistence or fishing for food. So it could be that some of what people said to us was because they didn't want another fisher overhearing that they needed to fish for food. And so, again, there's lots of different reasons for the data that we got here, but we certainly found that there was a stigma about fishing for food out on the piers.
So we were interested, in this question of access to shore fishing spaces, support cultural food security as well. And we started thinking more and more about, Florida's residents and the diversity of folks that we were seeing out on the piers and in the parks and along the shores, right? So Florida has the 4th largest immigrant population and the largest refugee resettlement program. And in our sample, I think we have a graph on this a bit later, but in particular, some of the Asian immigrants, the Asian population that we found in our sample was a lot larger than the proportion of folks in the Tampa Bay area, right? So, but at the same time, we also found that in general, amongst our whole sample, right, a lot of folks were cooking and eating the fish that they catch, right? Of everyone we sampled, 74% are cooking and eating their catch. The rest of them were catch and release. And of the folks who are keeping fish, almost half share fish on a regular basis with friends and neighbors, right? So we can see another component of that cultural element. And, certainly, and again, this crossed kind of ethnic boundaries, crossed income boundaries. A lot of folks have this component of sharing fish as part of the whole fishing experience.
To continue with this idea of fishing as provisioning, so people actually making use of these fish that they're catching, we thought it was really interesting that they're catching 27 different species of fish out there, so a real wide variety of fish. And then on average, people are keeping between 5 and 6 fish on a typical trip. So many people keeping the fish, a wide diversity of fish species being kept and caught and eaten and shared with friends and neighbors.
And then, we had that component of food security that's about food safety, right? And we wondered about people's opinions of the water quality and the quality of the fish. And these were, we had a kind of Likert scale, 1 to 5, like you've probably experienced on many surveys. And we asked them about their perceptions of the water quality, from very dirty to very clean, and they rated it kind of in the middle. And I think that a lot of people, and they talked about this in their interviews. But they remembered, stories about sewage spills, especially in the St. Petersburg area. There have been many sewage overages, and they remembered, seeing signs along the shoreline like the water's not safe today. And they remembered red tide episodes, right? And so there's real concern about water quality. It should be said that by many measures, the water quality in Tampa Bay is actually improved now from the 1980s. But, these concerns continue, and, at one point, I think it was in 2018, they found some antibiotic resistant bacteria in the water in Tampa Bay. So, there's these continuing, environmental contaminant events, which, fishers are definitely aware of talking about. And this is just an example of a couple of the stories, that people were talking about last summer. The Pine Point spill had a lot of people very worried, and there was a lot of red tide as well. And that became, we actually couldn't send our student interns, our research interns out for a period last summer because the red tide was so bad. So this is something that, people are really concerned about in terms of the safety aspect.
All right, moving to some of our other results here. So one of the things that we found so interesting out from our survey out on these piers and bridges is the diversity of people in these fishing spaces. So not a lot of gender diversity, as you can see. The blue are the male fishers and the orange are the female fishers.
Really increase the proportion every time.
That's right. I generated a lot of attention. I was doing that too, our students. But you can see the remarkable age diversity out there, income diversity particularly.
That was one of the most surprising things to us.
Absolutely. I mean, nearly equally split among our different income brackets. So we just, we have from households that make $25,000 and below a year to households making $100,000 and above a year in pretty equal measure out there on the piers. We sort of expected the wealthier fishers to be out on boats or just not on in the land spaces, but we found everyone out in the spaces. And then we asked people how they would identify race, ethnicity, and these are our results as well. Of course, about half white fishers, but then a mix of other races and ethnicities out there.
And again, we just found this so interesting because we cannot think of another public space where there's this much diversity in the Tampa Bay.
Yeah.
Maybe
Can I ask you, the category of Asian does that include, is that both East Asian and South Asian, or is that
I don't believe that
they're self-identified.
okay.
So this is what people told us and we wrote down.
Okay.
And I will say I don't believe we had a single South Asian person in our sample.
I mean, I guess it depends on how you define. Yeah, we may have had Sri Lanka. I thought so.
Sri Lanka. Hopefully we can go to mostly Southeast Asian folks out there. Yeah, mostly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
On the age group, you got a really dark blue at the 12 o'clock.
Yeah, it's right here.
That's folks in their 50s.
That's in the 50s, and then what's the 17%?
That's 18 and 19-year-olds.
Okay, and then what's the baby blue?
Baby.
Okay, baby blue would be
60.
50, 60?
60s,
That's the green.
Oh, I think it might be 70s, but I don't think it's.
Oh,
showing.
shoot, it is not showing up. It is 70s, I'm sorry. Yeah. It did fall off of the slide. Sorry about that. Yeah.
So the 2% is 18 and 19?
Yes.
Really?
Wow.
Yes, that's surprising.
No, I think this is 18 and 19.
Oh, okay.
I think this is 50s and no.
I'm sorry.
No,
No, it's part of all of the colors. Yeah.
When we exit out of this, I can probably look it up on our data that's connected to it, so we will. I'm sorry about the colors. I can't remember what the answer is. Yeah.
I don't think we have that many 18s and 19-year-olds.
We might not have had that many. That's kind of what I was
The bar
thinking.
for once for 50.
Okay.
I'm 90% sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
My question is on the income slide.
Yeah.
Is the lowest income 13% because some of these places the card is acceptable to lower income people?
Good question. Yeah.
If it was right downtown.
Right. So the major fishing spots, as you may know, are the Skyway Piers. That's where we interviewed lots and lots of people. And the Fort DeSoto fishing piers and the Fort DeSoto State Park. Lots and lots of people fishing there. Many of the rest of our fishing spots were a lot spottier in terms of even finding fishers there. And so you're absolutely right. That's a great point. The bus system does not go to either Fort DeSoto or the Skyway Piers. And Skyway Pier has a fairly hefty entrance fee. And Fort DeSoto has a small entrance fee, but it could also be dissuasive to people who don't have much money at all. So yes, that's definitely something we gave some thought to. I think if all we had done was like hang out downtown on the seawall and get every single person we could ever find there all the time, I bet that chunk of the pie would be a lot bigger. Yeah. Yeah.
But what is,
It's hard to carry your gear on public transportation.
Say that again?
It would be very hard to carry fishing gear on the boat.
Yeah, that's true.
You know,
Yeah.
the other issue would be, you don't have transportation, you can fish where you are.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that's part of the concern around the, the closure of some of the like neighborhood bridges and things like that, where, you do see people like on their bicycles with their fishing gear, and I see that a lot downtown. It's like just north of downtown.
I thought that you said it would be hard to get beer on. Instead of gear.
You gotta have your beer while you fish, so also, yeah. And you asked, so.
It's a combination fee, so I think it's $12 per vehicle last time I checked, and plus there's a fee per person in the vehicle.
Oh, wow.
So last time we tried to get on.
Probably.
Yeah.
Bayside, that would be, I don't think so, unless they changed it. I fish a lot, I don't fish on the Skyway Bridge. I went summer before last, and I think it was $4 a car on the south side. $4 a car and $4 a person, so I was thinking to myself, sure. I was just wondering if it was, I never went to
The north side.
I might be remembering $12 because that's how much we paid. But maybe it is per person. Yeah, you might be right about that.
because
I think it's per person.
who runs the North Bridge? Is that the county?
That is, state parks. That's state park.
Right, right. I think
You found the answer.
It's state park.
Google it.
So the Skyway fishing pier has a pier going on the south. Both fishing piers are open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Cost us $4 per vehicle to get out of here. 12 for oversized vehicles.
Oh,
Like actually not.
that's interesting. That sounds outdated though,
And then
interestingly.
there is a per person fee as well.
Oh, there is, yeah.
Charge you so much.
It cost us $18 to get on
Oh, wow.
with two of us in the car.
Anyways, $4 a vehicle, $4 per vehicle.
Oh, well, there you go. Okay. Luckily, we then got permits to do the research and we got to get on free. So our students could get on free. And we weren't dealing with that very often.
One other question before we proceed, did you ever examine whether people were fishing the lures which they own, or fishing the things which they have to purchase?
Great question. A combination of all those things. Yeah.
We did not ask that specific question, but we definitely, in our observations and our field notes, we were looking at that. And yeah, we found a whole range. Yeah, a lot of people with cats.
Right. And at those really well-provisioned sites, like the Skyway Bridge in Fort DeSoto, they have a bait shop there, and plenty of people were buying frozen bait and using that, but you certainly saw people with their sabiki rigs, like catching their own bait and using it. And then a lot of sharing of bait. We'll get to that in a second, but lots of sharing of bait out there. Yeah. All right. Any other questions about the diversity of the folks on the fishing cycle?
Yeah, so there's this concept that we've been reading about in some of the literature about so-called third places. So these are places that are not home, not work, but they're kind of in between. They're public spaces. They're also, they can be private spaces like barber shops and things like that. And there's been, some concern in the social science literature that these third places are really important for community development, community ties, and that they're kind of shrinking in the United States. So some folks that we read, this person Finley, he talks about how third places enrich social interaction, create sense of community belonging, and they generate this kind of social surplus, right? Collective feelings of civic pride, acceptance of diversity, trust, civility, and overall sense of togetherness, right? Which a lot of commentators would say, has been going in the opposite direction in many ways in our society. So we're curious, to what extent can these fishing spaces serve as these sorts of third places. Are they doing that? Are people, creating community in these places, or are there tensions? Can we find both?
Yeah. But on the flip side of things, we talked to plenty of people who said, one of the things I like about being out here is that I can stand next to someone that I would never otherwise be able to talk to or have any reason to talk to. And we get to talk about the dolphins and the fish and help each other out. And they really value that aspect of fishing on the piers and the bridges. Likewise, in our own experience, we've noticed that when we have a fishing pole in our hands, it's like the great equalizer. People who we would never have reason to talk to otherwise, maybe I might suppose that by maybe some bumper stickers on a truck or something like that, we'll stop and say, did you catch anything? We'll have a whole conversation and never would have otherwise for any other reason. So there really does seem to be this community built around fishing that is really special and doesn't happen for other reasons. So we've also found that there seem to be mental health benefits out there with fishing. Maybe you've experienced in the literature, we call these places blue spaces instead of green spaces. Green spaces are shown to have benefits to mental health, and blue spaces do too. So being out on the water. So here are just some quotes from some of the folks that we talked to. I just feel at peace. It's a stress relief. You're out there, you're burning time, you're letting the world melt away. Noel and I were just talking this morning about this and saying it's really remarkable that folks even fishing in pretty marginal areas that some of us might think seem kind of dirty or a little bit dangerous, or they're right under a highway overpass. Still in those places, people say, this is where I find my peace. This is where I find my mental rest. I really need this for myself. So it seems to extend to just about anywhere you can fish.
Yeah, and similarly, we found a lot of kind of social and cultural benefits as well. People talked a lot about how much they learned from other folks in these spaces. One person said, I just moved here, I come to the park a lot because I can talk to people that have more experience with fishing. And we heard that over and over, kind of that learning that they mentioned before, like that learning that was happening. And a lot of people talked about, intergenerational connections, right, about how they learned fishing from their grandfather and they're teaching it to their grandchildren. Right, one person said, my granddaughter, she's on her 3rd fishing pole. It's something that we can all do together. And she was so proud. and so this is something, that we, again, we didn't necessarily expect or realize beforehand. And it just was a really prominent theme in our interviews.
And what I love about what's represented by this quote is that people certainly were moving to the area and excited to learn about fishing from other people. What can we catch? Where is the best place? What's the best equipment? That sort of thing. But they were also learning all sorts of other things from each other. They were talking about finding apartments from people out on the fishing piers and all those sorts of other life things. It wasn't just confined to fishing knowledge. It was confined to, it was expanded to all of life knowledge, all the needs of life. All right. Oh. So Noel and I started thinking from our own sorry, it's getting late. I've been teaching all day. The words are not coming to me quickly. From our own sort of educational backgrounds or disciplinary backgrounds, we started to get interested in these shore fishing spaces as maybe commons. And commons sort of around the world are defined as any resource that is widely accessible, used by many people, and communally owned. And so the idea of commons can get complicated when you're talking about urban areas because most land, the vast majority of land is either privately owned, owned by the city, owned by the state, something like that. So you don't get situations where there's just land without property rights attached to it and people can make use of it as they want. So how do we think about commons in an urban setting? And so there have been plenty of scholars who have talked about this very issue, and they said, well, people don't have to have formal property rights in a place, but they can engage in common behaviors defined as the active and ongoing making of common spaces. And even if this land is owned by someone else, the users of that land, by the things that they do, can actually make it a commons. we'll show you some examples of common behaviors here.
Yeah, so these authors have kind of come up with some sort of general elements to describe common behaviors, right? So establishing rules or protocols for access and use as a group, taking care of and accepting responsibility for resources, and distributing benefits in ways that take into account the well-being of others. And we kind of found a mix of all of these things. You know, not all of these are happening in every space for sure, but elements of them are happening in different fishing spaces around the bay. In particular, number 3, we saw a lot of people sharing fish as bait, or some folks who were catch and release fishing. If they, if someone asked them, are you going to throw that back? Can I have it? Like, they would share it. And there was a lot of that kind of sharing going on. I think we also, we found some people who really talked a lot about how they got to know the fishery resources through fishing, right? They gained an appreciation for why does the water quality matter? Because they cared about, that they would have a fishery resource and that their grandchildren would have a healthy fishery resource. So really saw some of that.
Absolutely. And we should probably just reiterate, because this is the really important thing about commenting behaviors, is that these are rules and protocols that come out of the community itself. So there are certainly rules that the parks have for the fishers, and there are rules that Fish and Wildlife have for the fishers, and they may or may not follow these things. But as a community, they make their own rules. Who belongs, who doesn't belong, how we use this space, how we protect this space, how we protect the people in the space. And we have seen, as Noelle says, kind of a mixed bag of those things, but we certainly do see some of these things happening. I might mention also the spot in Tampa, where there's a group of folks who are regular fishers there, and they have told us that it's like family, the fishers on this fishing pier. They come and have parties together out there. They like to fish for sharks at night. But there's a group at
the Ballast Point Pier.
The Ballast Point Pier, yeah. And they say that there's a group of homeless people that live near the pier, and what they'll do is often, they say, they catch fish and sell it and give the money to the homeless population nearby. So they're thinking of themselves kind of as a larger socio-ecological system in some ways and contributing. But it's not all happiness in these unicorns and kittens and these spaces. This is a quote we really like. The city is not a frictionless agglomeration of commoners, but rather a site for ongoing contestation about what counts as common and who counts as commoners. So a lot of what we've been discovering is who fishers count as being in their fishing community and who they don't count as being in their fishing community. And we've seen a lot of interesting things there. Anything you want to add to that?
Just particularly between folks who are catch and release, and they, have very, very strong reasons for being catch and release, and they are very upset if they, see someone keeping a fish that's undersized, for instance, and understandably so. But there tends to be tension around that. That's the main tension. So just to talk a little bit more about some of the challenges we see in these spaces, right? That we've been tracking these things. There seems to be continued enclosure of shore fishing spaces. I think the Tierra Verde Bridge, right, was just demolished. And there's a new kind of high-rise bridge there. There's going to be diminished fishing. We see some fishing bans in various places. And we see this inequitable access to fishing spaces, right? And that's partially because of the fees that are set up for access in certain very desirable fishing piers, such as the Highway. We see, kind of very uneven policing of fishery regulations. And we see some of those social tensions and distrust amongst fishers as well as community building. And then I think one of the biggest things is we see a lack of public investment in amenities and infrastructure for shore fishing spaces, right? So there's a lot of investment for things like boat ramps, and those kind of accessible places for people who have boats. But there's much less investment in shore fishing spaces. And that includes, things like restrooms and things that make it easier, and trash cans, things that make it easier for people to take care of a space and to be there for a significant amount of time.
So the implications for public policy of all of this, there are many, of course, but some of the ones that we have written about are continuing to invest in that physical and social infrastructure. Oh, 5 minutes, okay, thank you. Recognizing that this is a really important place that people come together, not just to fish, but for all sorts of reasons, to support the community, to build the community. So putting some resources into that is really not a bad idea. And we do think that with added resources, people are able to practice that comedy even better. So take care of their natural resources even better, take care of each other even better. So we think that's important. Keeping fishing spaces accessible to everyone, we think is really important. Equitable policing of the rules out there, we think is really important. Making fishing regulations easier to understand and available in multiple languages. Some of the finger pointing that goes on in the piers and the bait shops is one group of people who looks different than another group of people makes assumptions about what that other group of people is doing out there, and if they even understand the rules, because I don't think they speak English. We've heard that a lot. So we think, could we build community out here if there was more signage, more access to fishing regulations into the different languages that are spoken out on the pier, so people could start to trust each other and believe that they have the information they need to have to do things right out there. I think highlighting the importance of fishing for food is really important, that subsistence fishing is not a shameful thing to be doing, that lots of people are doing it, not even just poor people. And so having some signage out on the piers about what you can use fish for, how you can make it, how you can fillet it, all those sorts of things, we think might take the sting a little bit out of people that actually need to fish for food out there, but don't want to admit it and don't want to talk about it. And we thank our undergraduate research assistants, the money that we've gotten from the school, and of course, all the fishers that we have been bugging for years. It's very exciting. Yeah, they another.
I'm sure the Sunshine Sky will be here now. So that's regulated by the Department of Natural Resources or. So what kind of use is that? Do they keep stats on numbers of people that are going out, or zip code information, or what do we know? How many people go out on that every year? We know.
That's a great question. We have not asked the state parks for that information, actually. Do you have anything from your fishers about that?
Not that wrong.
I haven't received track of how many people.
I'm sure they do.
I'm sure they do.
So when people go out, they access it by, they have to pay, right?
Yes, you have to pay.
Unless is there a pass, the state park pass, can you access it for free?
Don't really think there's something like that. It really is the priciest place to fish around here, and I don't think there's tax. Interesting, because it's open 24 hours, our students have been learning about folks that will come and camp out there unbeknownst apparently to the gatekeepers, and there could be some wild things going on there at night.
So, do you have any feeling about how many of the people that you survey live here versus our tourists? They're just out fishing.
That's a good question. We actually did not include that in our survey. But we certainly were chatting with people and finding out about them.
My educated guess. I think maybe a quarter of the people we talked to were from out of town. Probably 75% were regular residents. We did most of our research over 3 summers. And we actually see, fewer out of towners during the summer because it's like the hardcore people that are out there in the middle of, you know, the Florida summer. So yeah, I think if we did more surveys in the winter, we'd probably find a higher proportion.
And most people are fishing close to where they live. Do you have a feeling about that?
That's a good question too. Especially when it comes to the Skyway Pier and Fort DeSoto, people are coming from pretty good distances to fish there. And even the Skyway Pier, people will come in from Orlando, from pretty far distances because it's kind of famous.
It definitely depends on the context, like the specific space. Like downtown, you find a lot more people who are just.
Here's the most important question.
Oh yeah.
What's the 3 most common species people are catching?
Oh my God, we do have that. We do have that data, but I don't know it off the top of my head. I mean, mullet in a way, but a lot of them are using it for bait.
Right.
Snappers, I'm sure.
That's
The
right.
mackerel,
Yeah.
the big one.
Spanish mackerel.
The speckled trout.
Are not very liberal because we've had so much waterfall problems. Huge walls on the west coast, for sure, and on the east coast.
Mhm.
You know, that's the reason our manatee is on, it's waterfall. Had waterfall, these killed the grass, manatees in the grass. Sea trout live in the grass, we have no grass, we have no sea trout. So water quality is really everything. Absolutely.
So in your survey, you would ask them, what are you catching?
Yeah, and they've lived everything. Right. So we have long lists. So.
How much you catch? What do you catch?
Well, we do, but we ask both. Yeah, we ask both. How many do you keep? And then what are you fishing for?
And
Yeah.
a perfect example of the limits and the limitations is, like right now, from the Manatee County line north to Tampa Bay, you can keep snook, you can keep redfish, and you can keep sea trout. From the Manatee line south all the way to Naples, you can keep a limited number of sea trout, but no snook and no redfish. And that's due to the creel surveys that keep track of how many fish are there. You know,
Is that a red tide consequence?
I'm sorry?
Is it differential due to the red tide?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And then if anybody was here in 2010, the massive fish kills that happened in 2010 because of the cold snaps, especially for snook. That's like my favorite fish. The fish for my favorite species. And we came in 2010.
Oh, you did?
And
What did you say was your favorite species? I missed it. Sorry.
snook.
Oh, snook. Okay.
Species.
A lot of our fish jumps in here. All the time.
There was no snook available for 4 years after the 2010 freeze because there were just millions and millions of guilty by the freeze of the cold weather. They're tropical fish when the water temperature is 50 degrees. They're all.
Did you have a
Right.
question for that?
Well, yeah, I had an observation that, I think the mingling is really interesting to me of the different kind of communities. I used to go out to Bowling Green, Kentucky when I lived in Kentucky, and there's some great places to fish out there. But there's also a lot of resettled Hmong communities and other groups of people from South and Southeast Asia, and it was very funny to go out and chat with everybody and then see, you just get the whole range of anybody who you would imagine in your imagination would live in Western Kentucky, but then also, these other groups of immigrants and stuff, and everybody's kind of hanging out there fishing together, and it was kind of a cool, there was a little bit of self-segregation, I think, but it was also more mingling than you would find in town,
Yeah.
And I contrasted that with my own experience as a fly fisherman when I lived out west. And, I never fished with wet flies. That's just terrible. You have like these weird lines of segregation that you create with other fishermen too, I'm not going to are you kidding me? It's just, so
you do things in certain ways, and then you make these like dividing lines, and it's just very, on this very arbitrary way that doesn't bear a lot of relationship to how the kinds of things that we normally think divide people.
Yeah.
It's using how often do people fish in survey?
How often? Very, I mean, it depends, but the locals really, I mean, they're out there multiple times a month, like at least once a week, multiple times a week. I mean, it was quite a lot. They lived around here. Yeah. This was really the thing to do. Yeah. At all times, day and night, all times. Yeah.
I have a comment and a question at the same time. So I just applied for my fishing license, and I'm not considered a Florida resident. Since months today here. And there's a really significant difference in the cost of fishing rights for not.
Yeah.
Did you find in your research that there was a high level of enforcement of that? Like is Fish and Wildlife Board saying you demonstrate your license for that? Like I find I get being worded and I haven't had people who are terrifying.
Yeah. People are certainly on people's minds. And like we found that people would talk about some of the out of the way places being almost like raided with some frequency, like underneath the Courtney Campbell Causeway. People were very kind of uptight, even sort of suspicious of us showing up, because this was a very tight-knit community and a marginal space, and they didn't know what we were there to do. And certainly, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, on the other hand, we also had a lot of folks ask for more enforcement.
That's true.
Because they said, I think people are keeping undersized fish all the time. FWC's never out here. So yeah. We definitely saw both sides.
It was polarized. I think you either heard people saying, "I wish there were more rules," or people saying, "They come after me, and I don't see them going after those people." Which really had some really interesting
So Fisher profiling going on there.
People say they're, I mean, yeah.
Where the license going?
If you talk to fishers, to the FWC people and the conservation police in other states, they absolutely profile people who they know are offenders. In my home state where I grew up in, until I moved down here, one of the conservation police who was a good friend of mine said, we do not, if you're an offender, we have your name statewide. Your conservation officer has your name, and your name doesn't come off that list until the obituary comes out.
These cases of Fish and Wildlife just look pretty kind of complex. They just come out.
Yeah.
Did you have a question? You had your hand up.
No, someone had mentioned something that they wish that there was more policing. I used to live in Tampa, and I lived here on the intercoastal now for over a year, and I've seen one Coast Guard.
Really? Really?
Right here, right here. I live next door.
There's sometimes a sheriff's boat out. It isn't really those during. I have yet to see a Fish and Wildlife boat out. And just on the water.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
And all the people.
So I don't know where
It is.
They're
Yes.
Yeah, it is.
they're usually looking for speeders at boat violations.
That's for sure.
I've never heard of anyone getting stopped to see if you have a fishing license.
Well, there's on the water, yeah. And it's interesting, when you're fishing from shore, there's quite a lot of people who actually are exempt from having to have a fishing license, so it gets kind of complicated.
65 and over, anybody 65 and over in the state of Florida, if you're a resident, you don't need a fishing license.
Oh, wow. And if you're eligible for food stamps, you don't have to.
I wanted to thank our wonderful presenters.